While they may offer some relief, there still is no cure for the common cold in sight.
I hate to be a downer about not having a cure for the common cold, but there's a number of reasons.
He says pharmaceutical companies would have to invest a lot of time and money because there are so many different viruses, and the potential drug would have to have a near-perfect safety profile.
People don't die from it, and so you'd have to have something that's inexpensive, effective, and doesn't cause harm on its own.
Drug companies have tried to produce a cure, but turns out the side effects were worse than the cold itself. Dr. Anthony Fauci is the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. He says it would be nearly impossible to prevent the hundreds of different viruses.
Developing one vaccine against one or two or three of them is almost folly. The odds are your vaccine is not going to be doing a pretty good job. Is almost folly. The odds are your vaccine is not going to be doing a pretty good job of protecting you.
For most of us, a cold is on.
Coronaviruses are a huge family of virus species that infect animal cells. Some infect chickens, others infect pigs, some infect humans, but most of them are extremely mild. They simply give you the common cold. Corona means crown and refers to the unusually large crown-like spikes sticking out of their membranes. These protein spikes are selectively sticky, sort of like Velcro. They don't attach to most objects, but are extremely sticky when they bump into specific molecules found on the outsides of animal cells. Once held firmly in place, the coronavirus waits until swallowed by the cell. It then begins to reproduce at the cell's expense. Different animal species have different types of molecules on the outsides of their cells. Because of this, bird-infecting coronaviruses usually can't infect humans. Their Velcro doesn't hold strong enough to our cells. Unfortunately, the natural process of evolution can sometimes help a virus overcome this problem. When virus genes are being copied during reproduction, mutations can occur. These are either due to simple copying errors or processes called reassortment and recombination. These happen when two or more viruses infect a single cell. In most cases, mutations that change the shape of viral spikes render the virus useless. Their Velcro no longer sticks to any host cells. On rare occasions, however, a chance mutation will just happen to allow a virus to attach to a new host species. If the modified virus is then lucky enough to encounter that new host species, infection can occur. We call this a spillover infection. The virus has spilled over into a new type of host. Early on, during a spillover event, the virus usually isn't very good at infecting its new host. Its Velcro is not a perfect match, and many other challenges might slow the virus down. Oftentimes, the mutations that let it infect the new host also make it worse at infecting its original host. Because of this, many spillover viruses go extinct after infecting just one or two people. They're usually dead ends. That said, if the virus can survive and reproduce just long enough, natural selection will promote any new mutations that help it better spread and reproduce in the new host population. Positive mutations accumulate over multiple generations. Negative mutations are discarded until, bam, a new epidemic is being screamed about on the news. Though it may seem to us that these new viruses just sort of pop into existence overnight, scientists now know there is a long, slow burn before each explosion.
People to stay home and governments to act.
Let's urge our leaders to implement 15 days of extreme social distancing, close schools and public places with their social gatherings to flatten that curve and to prevent further spread.
The former president of the United States tweeted it. I saw Nicolas Maduro, the Venezuelan strongman leader, sharing it on state TV.
Graphics reporter Harry Stevens created the simulation to show how diseases spread exponentially and how everyone plays a part.
I'm at home, you're at home, our engineer Billy's at home. We're social distancing.
Yeah, that's right.
Harry tells his story using dots.
Even I didn't really get it until I saw the dots moving on my computer screen. Instead of trying to simulate COVID-19 in the real world with all of its complexities and complications, we chose to make a fake disease called simulitis. And simulitis is pretty simple. Whenever a sick person touches a healthy person, the healthy person gets sick, which of course is not like COVID-19. You won't always get sick if you come into contact with an infected person, but just to keep things simple, we made it that way. And also, everybody who gets simulitis eventually recovers from it.
And if this were COVID-19, some of those dots would be disappearing.
That's exactly right. Simulitis doesn't kill, COVID-19 does. So the first one starts out with 200 dots, all moving at the same speed, and you can see that just from moving around randomly and interacting randomly, that the disease spreads very, very quickly through the whole community, and that even when it starts with one person, that the first person ends up infecting people all the way on the other side of the town.
The second simulation, a forced quarantine. At first, it looks good for the lucky dots outside the quarantine zone.
And then what happens is that wall starts to open up slowly. So when that wall opens up, what that represents is the difficulty of enforcing one of these types of quarantines. The logistical challenges of enforcing that kind of quarantine are varied and extreme.
So what happens if most people adopt social distancing?
No quarantine, no walls. It's just you tell 3/4 of the dots or 3/4 of the people in town to just stay still. And the other quarter is moving, but the disease suddenly gets stopped, right? So the sick dot might be moving around and it might infect somebody who's still, but then that person who's still can't move around and infect other dots. And just by asking 3/4 of the dots to remain still, suddenly the virus spreads much slower. So then I just asked, half of the people that were moving before to stop moving. I went to journalism school, and there was a class on data visualization. So I took that class, and I just kind of got hooked after that. Seeing how you could communicate so much information in such exciting and fun ways in graphics.
That have been selected to new virus for humans. What we are seeing is that there are now mutations that have been selected that makes the virus even better adapted to transmission. The way it works is every time that the virus replicates, makes a copy of itself, it tries to make a copy that is identical. But sometimes you make mistakes, right? Most of these cases, these mistakes, they are actually detrimental, so these are being eliminated. But there are a few that have mutations. Now, if these ones that are a few, there is one mutation that actually make it better, then if this mutation is able to get out into a new host, then it will start to propagate and it start to dominate. So the more mutations you generate, the most likely there will be one of these mutations that makes the virus better. The more replication there is, the more the chances that one of these mutations will happen and will fly. That can happen in regions where there is a lot of viruses, or in people that they have the virus for a long period of time, and therefore are most likely to generate more mutations.
All viruses mutate.
As viruses multiply, they change. And the same is happening to the coronavirus.
All viruses mutate. And that is to be expected.
Scientists have been tracking those mutations while following coronavirus's journey around the world. Some of the mutations help the virus to spread, others do nothing at all. But as coronavirus multiplies and changes, could it also become more deadly? This is your COVID-19 special here on DW. I'm Chris Coburn. Welcome to the program. The coronavirus is not the same that came out of China half a year ago. Like other viruses, it has mutated and a recent study suggests the globally predominant strain is more infectious than the original.
The new coronavirus, like all other viruses, is constantly mutating as it replicates inside its human host. The virus uses us to multiply by injecting its genetic information into our cells. The cell then becomes a kind of virus factory, mass-producing the genetic material that allows more of the virus to develop. As the virus replicates, mistakes are often made. Errors mean the genetic material changes, causing a mutated version of the virus. If those changes are advantageous, the mutation will go on to spread. SARS-CoV-2 doesn't appear to mutate as easily as other viruses, like influenza, for example. Experts say it doesn't have to, because thus far it's been so successful. Nevertheless, a mutation could take place that might hit humans much harder than previous versions of the virus. Of course, it would be an evolutionary disadvantage if, as a virus, my host died while I was trying to replicate. The most successful viruses are those that show no symptoms to begin with, allowing them to spread before taking down their host. If a more aggressive mutation of coronavirus were already spreading, it might be hard to spot.
Or Moderna instead, because of concerns over potential blood clot. To have access to Pfizer or Moderna from the FDA tonight, they are now urging Americans to avoid the Johnson & Johnson vaccine if you have access to Pfizer or Moderna instead, because of concerns over potential blood clot.
The viewers, but according to this publication, just by binding to ACE2, SARS-CoV-2 spike proteins can lead to a very serious and chronic illness called PAH, pulmonary hypertension, which according to authors doesn't have a cure, can affect people at any age, and in most cases leads to death in around 2 to 3 years if it's untreated. However, even if treated, it gives the patient only 60 to 70% chance of surviving more than 3 years. What makes the PAH especially scary is the fact that it requires a sophisticated examination, invasive right heart catheterization, to be diagnosed, while its symptoms, shortness of breath, fatigue, or dizziness, are similar to other non-life-threatening conditions.
Let's just really quick go over, what pH is and why does it make you feel the way it does. Well, pulmonary hypertension essentially means that the pressure in the arteries of the lungs, the tubes of blood that take the blood, I should say, from the right side of your heart to the lungs where it picks up oxygen, those tubes are abnormal. They're narrowed. In some cases, they're just gone. And as a result, the blood flow through those tubes is more difficult, and the heart has to strain to pump the blood through the lungs. And as a result, oxygen has a harder time getting into your blood, even though you're breathing it into your lungs. And doctors think about it as what we call a ventilatory inefficiency. Means you're wasting a lot of the breathing that you're doing. It's not actually helping you by getting oxygen into the areas of your lungs and the rest of your body. And then over time, patients with pulmonary hypertension really get into trouble when the heart starts fatiguing. The right side of the heart just has a hard time pumping the blood through.